Hola, guys. Welcome to the Island Renaissance podcast with me, Suresh De Silva. I have with me here a very special guest, a dear, dear friend, a world renowned author, entrepreneur, the brains behind Team Watchdog. He has released globally renowned and loved books such as The Inhuman Race, Numbercast, The Salvage Crew. I first read a short story of his called The Slow, Sad Suicide of 𝐸𝐸𝐻𝐻 Wijeratne. And we got to know each other, I would say, 5-6 years ago. And we've become good friends. Savants to a certain degree, rebellious to a certain degree, chaotic to a certain degree. We connected on a lot of different levels. So, without further ado, the gentleman, author, extraordinaire himself, Mr. Yudhanjaya Wijeratne.
Hi, it's fantastic to be here. Thanks, man.
Love having you here. Would you like to tell us, so, what's new?
Ooh, that's a tough question. In terms of books?
In terms of books. Let's start with the books then.
So in terms of books, we have a bunch of stuff that's supposed to come out, in the near future, I would say. So there's The Wretched and the Damned, which won the Gratian, but was never published. I think the only people who've seen that manuscript are myself, the jury,
judges.
the jury, and the publisher. So that's going to be published. It's going to come out as a novel over email as well. I'm going to experiment a little bit with the form. We have Pilgrim Machines, which is a sequel to The Salvage Crew.
Okay.
And we have a book of short stories that are coming out. Incidentally, it's going to be called The Slow, Sad Suicide and Other Stories. So it collects all the stories that I've written from 2017 to now. And, some of them are self-published. At the tail end of the career, you have stuff going up on Wired and so on and so forth. So all of these collected for the first time. And it's fascinating to me to see the evolution as I go along. And we have a very special book which is currently being queried and being bounced around by one of my agents. It's called Clause and Effect. It's about a giant orange cat hustling his way through a fantasy world. It's the very opposite of The Witcher in a fun way, if you will.
Right.
So instead of, guy comes in, kills the monster, looks good, it's guy comes in, he's a bit of a dumbass. And the actual brains behind the outfit is not the guy in shining armor, but a giant orange cat who's going, hey, dude, we can't do exorcisms for free, okay? There's wear and tear on swords. We need to afford armor. Have you seen how much the horse eats? So it's genuinely a lot of fun. So these are very, very different projects. And all of these are running at the same time. And these should start coming out shortly.
Very, very cool. So, you have so many accolades. I don't think I did justice with the intro. You are a data scientist by profession.
Yes.
And if I'm not mistaken, you were at WSO2 when you wrote
Numbercast,
Sad Suicide of...
And then Slow, Sad Suicide as well.
But that was also where you did your first novel, the debut, Numbercast.
Yeah.
So that was 2017.
2017, yeah.
You released it. So it was with Numbercast that you were the first Sri Lankan author to get the largest publishing deal with HarperCollins. Am I right?
Yes. 5 books with HarperCollins.
So Numbercast was one of those. That was the first, was it?
Yeah, so Numbercast, Slow, Sad Suicide was self-published.
Okay.
Because I had actually written Numbercast before Slow, Sad Suicide.
Oh, right, okay.
And what happened with Numbercast was I took it to local publishers and they were like, well, this is science. We love this, but this is science fiction. We've never done this. And we don't know how to, is there a market for
Go
this
about
kind
it,
of,
right.
Yeah, so then I went, okay, let me figure out this thing called Amazon and the Kindle ecosystem and so on.
Right.
And I was aware of this because I read quite a lot on Kindle. And for me, getting a book has always been, it's something interesting. Let me buy now. Let me get that delivered in 20 seconds. So it made sense for me to go that route. And to do that, I wrote The Slow, Sad Suicide. It had sort of been floating around in my mind for a while. I was drinking heavily at Mintage one night. And, I just started writing while drinking. 1.5 bottles of 𝐸𝐸𝐻𝐻 later, you have The Slow, Sad Suicide.
How were you doing the writing at the time? Were you doing it on a tab or were you...
The Slow, Sad Suicide was written on bar napkins.
Nice.
And then retyped later once I'd gotten over the headache of the consequent hangover.
Like the best rock and roll and heavy metal lyrics are
it was
on
basically
napkins
just drinking non-stop. The number cast was written in a much more sober fashion on a laptop, and at the time I lived in Ragama. So what I would do is I would get on the train to come to Kollupitiya and go to office, work there, and the train to Ragama, there's one at 9:30. So I'd stay in office after work was done, and I'd write until 9:30, and then I'd go and then catch the train, get back, sort of refresh myself, and then fall asleep, repeat over and over again.
So the Battaramulla transition happened in 2018, 2019?
2018, I left WSO2 to join Learn Asia.
Okay.
Because I wanted to work more on public policy. I wanted to actually do a lot more data science work.
Right.
And I found Learn Asia a great learning environment to learn about the world.
Right.
Because I felt that at that stage in my life, I didn't have a degree. I dropped out, the tail end of A-levels to work. I felt that I wanted to learn more about the world that I was in and how it came together. Numbercast had sort of awakened that in me, this process of learning. And I decided to leave for Learn Asia. That's when I moved to Battaramulla. Yeah.
So we met while you were at Learn Asia, right?
Yeah.
That's interesting. So you're, a well-known activist as well. I mean, anyone who bothers to Wikipedia your sexy ass could see that you're an activist. And
I still don't know who writes at Wikipedia.
Yeah.
Because they put my full name on there. Like,
dude,
yeah.
I saw that. Just
that's like,
I thought, okay, I know quite a lot about this dude.
Yeah.
This guy's a bro and all. We hang out. But maybe I'll stumble upon something that I don't know. And guess, lo and behold, the first thing I see is I tell my wife, Jess, I'll just introduce him as Yudhanjaya.
Yudha.
Yes. That's better.
There's not enough space on a book cover to fill that full name in.
Because a mouthful would be an understatement. How do you go abroad? How is it on the passport?
So I shit you not.
So just let everyone know your full name.
Going to South Africa for the first time. The name was too long.
Yeah.
And there were problems in immigration. When I went to Berlin for IGF, right, to present, at IGF, Internet Governance Forum, everybody's talking about pluralism, multilingualism, all of that. The registration system wouldn't accept my name. So it gave me Rajapaksa Bandara. That was the name that it accepted me under. And all the Germans are like, we cannot change the system. I was like, but that's not my name.
Yeah.
I've had an immigrations official in Singapore, back when you had to, first time you have to kind of write the whole thing and give it. This was before they actually automated most of the queues. So I went through, first time in Singapore, everything's like, wow, fancy, and I'm like giving this thing. And he looks at my passport and he goes, your parents didn't love you, did they? And I was like, God damn, man, why you gotta hurt me like this? I just landed. Why you gotta hurt me like this?
Well, would you like, for the benefit of our viewers who might not have any idea what we're talking about, to just mention your full name?
So my name, the name that I use is Yudhanjaya Wijeratne. My full name is Rajapaksa Konara Mudyanselage Bilesha Yudhanjaya Bandara Wijeratne.
Even the crew over here are going...
If any of you listening are parents, do your children a favor and just bloody truncate the name. But, I've gotten...
How was it in school? Did they just call you by the initials? Because in St. Thomas's College, they call us by either the initials or the surname.
Yeah, so it was either the surname, but in school I had to have a little badge pinned that spelled my name, because now the teachers could actually spell Yudhanjaya properly. So I have certificates, English prizes going to Yudhanjaya Wijeratne, Maths to Yudhanjaya Wijeratne. We have prizes to Dhananjaya Wijeratne. I'm like, man, it's a...
One for each personality.
Yeah. One for each personality. So now I'm like, I use Yudhanjaya Wijeratne because it's a name that has meaning to me. But I appreciate the sort of the fact that there's a story behind these old Sinhala names, right?
Yes.
You can sort of pinpoint dynasty, clan markers, potential location that this person comes from. I appreciate more and more the fact that there is a story behind these names. And it's been interesting. So I now stick to just Yudhanjaya Wijeratne. And even that's not searchable sometimes. But it is what it is.
It is unique, though.
It is unique. I love...
Have you met any other Yudhas?
No. I like my name, Yudhanjaya.
Yeah.
Because it gets me all the unique email addresses. And I like it. I genuinely do.
The Yudha is great. Like, you go anywhere in India and you just shout Suresh and you'll have like troglodytes and trolls crawling out of trees.
Half of Delhi will be like,
yes.
Yudhanjaya, it's like, oh, Gmail goes, oh, you're the first Yudhanjaya here.
You're the first Yudhanjaya here. Yeah. That's true. So, this I want to check. Now, where do you feel there is a correlation between your data science work and being an activist? I know that you have managed to coalesce and find a way to sort of intertwine both. But the thing is, they're not mutually exclusive. But also at the same time, they're standalone pursuits of yours.
Okay.
So how would you sort of explain that?
So I don't bill myself as an activist because as of late, that term has come to mean professionally online people, shall we say.
Yes.
What the data science came in useful was, like when you were working at Learn Asia, right? We're doing all sorts of very interesting things using call detail records from 10 million people. So you see the call trace, the tower it connects to recipient. To identify where people live and where they go to work, so that you can then tell the government, hey, you're doing this. This was way back when the Colombo megapolis was the hot topic of the day. If you're spending money on roads, this is where people actually need roads. Because this is where they actually live. This is where they actually commute. Right. Let's not waste money. So, going from that to using Facebook data to all the other stuff that I've done, it was in the pursuit of understanding the systems that surround us, understanding how they work, how they're broken, and why. And that data science sort of training / background / very practical hands-on training, it helped me realize the things that I care about and the things that I don't care about, and also how to slowly improve on these things. Now, for example, I care about the environment. It's a pet peeve of mine that Colombo is getting hotter.
Right.
Because we keep cutting down trees, right? And as a result, there's something called the urban heat island effect, where you have so much concrete and tarmac soaking in heat and never really cooling down because you don't have heat sinks, if you will. And, to do that, if a government official is making a decision, right, they have to rely on census data. And the census is sort of one of the most useful instruments a country can have.
This is transactional data, yes?
No, this is literally a census where they send, these people out to, I think, well over 25,000 homes, randomly selected across the country, to gather data on everything from how do you dispose of your garbage to...
Pure qualitative?
Quant.
Okay.
Quant.
Okay.
Massive, large-scale quant.
Okay.
From how do you dispose of your garbage to what type of roof tile do you have, to are you renting or do you own your home. So this is a massive data collection exercise. And the state needs data, not just now, but even if you go back to Kautilya's Arthashastra, half that book, it's a fantastic book. It's about how to run surveys at such a scale that the king should be able to look at a village and go, how many old people are there? How many pregnant women are there? What kind of support do we need to send them, right?
Right.
So the census in Sri Lanka is run once every 10 years. So the last census we have data for is 2012. 2022 census didn't happen.
Wow.
It's happening. It's rolling out now, but it will take years before the data is collected, processed, and sent out.
Dissected and the insights are gathered.
Now, if you think back to 2012, so much has changed since then.
That is true.
So one thing we are working on now, for example, is using satellite imagery from the Sentinel-2 satellite by the European Space Agency to do some of that every single year.
Sort of like mapping it out.
Yeah, so we are using satellite imagery to map out urban, like growth of urban spaces, deforestation, growth of cropland, water bodies, to build these large-scale maps of Sri Lanka from 2017 to 2022, one map a year. And, it's about improving that. And now you have data on which people can make better decisions.
Right.
So that's the shape and nature of my activism. I get genuinely annoyed when people spout propaganda or they spout opinions without having the facts underneath. So I think over time, what the data science did to me was to go, this is where you should direct your energy, making the data available. People make decisions. Sometimes people make very stupid decisions. Typically, what I find is the larger the mass of people, the stupider they are. But let them make decisions based on good data. So that's at the heart of the whole Watchdog project, right? We explain the collapse down to 4 decimal points. When people are talking about Chinese debt traps, we explain, no, it's not Chinese debt traps. It's the fact that we have these massive loans, these foreign loans taken from private markets. That's what's sinking us. So then looking back at tax policy all the way back to 2000, and we're pointing out that, yeah, great. I mean, if you want to vote in people who reduce taxes every time they come in, you are going to eventually end up with a broke government. And you simultaneously increase the size of
we're going to bleed internally.
Right? So it's making these systems explainable. We did a 13,000 word piece on transport, for example, which I think is one of the single most valuable reference documents about transport for the layman. And it goes into detail about how the roads work, who manages what, who's responsible for this, what's the market share of buses to tuk-s, all of this stuff. How many kilometers do they travel? If you look at private transport, how expensive is it versus the average living condition of Sri Lankans? And we'll take data from the census to do that. So it's about giving the data to people.
All right. So this data, that particularly what you're talking about, like, especially like, shall we talk about, like, say, the transport element? Do you submit this data to the state, the authorities, or is it to private corporations?
We put it online for everyone to read at watchdog.team. Everything we do is public.
Nice.
And the data is public, the write-ups are public, every single thing we do is public. So that how it plays into, like, the fiction is the type of fiction that I typically write, the type of fiction that I enjoy reading and enjoy interacting with is aware of systems. I'm, for example, perpetually, not irritated. I would say I walk away from the type of stuff is like, the king has a magic sword and his magic sword cuts everything and everything was good in the land. For me, that's a tale for children. I'm not interested in that. I'm interested in knowing king had a magic sword, great. What about the rest of the army? What were the supply trains like? Who fed everybody? How many meals did they have? Once they got in, I think George R. Martin, famous, he said, what was Aragon's tax policy? And I think he meant that as a dig at Tolkien because he was right. But I genuinely do want to know what Aragon's tax policy is, right? I want to know how these systems are built because for me, we interact as individuals. We make our choices in a framework of systems on systems, of these systems constantly interacting.
We always have, right?
Yes.
Civilized society always has.
Civilization always has. And pre-civilization, we can ditch sort of the Rousseau style, primitive hunter-gatherers living in happiness nonsense. Because if you read David Graeber's The Dawn of Everything, you find far more primitive societies before agricultural societies that had very sophisticated social interactions, very sophisticated social contracts.
Trade.
Self-organization, right? The nature of hierarchy and all of these things. And everywhere you go, where there are 3 people, you will find a system emerging. And I want to know how these systems shape people's choices, how people's choices how they interact with these systems as well, how they nudge these systems. So that's a perpetual fascination for me. And so this plays into the fiction, this plays into the journalism, this plays into pretty much everything I do, the shape and nature of systems.
Nice. Really great response. With regards to systems, let's navigate a little bit towards a little bit more dire, if you will, or more serious conversation. When we talk about political systems and political structures, and I don't necessarily mean it in a domestic, in a domestic perspective, but we can clearly see that a lot of political systems tend to fail. And they fail, one would argue, based on sociological issues, or it can be issues of infrastructure. foundational problems, right? There could be other systematic ruptures and fissures that start to happen in time. Because even systems without strategy and constant renewal and upgrade will tend to fall flat on its face.
Yes.
But because you have access to so much of insights and data, and you lean very heavily towards data-driven decision making and insights, which I wholly support, by the way, as a lecturer of digital strategy and also a guy doing his doctorate also dealing with business psychology. The advent of generative AI and tech and data-driven decision making is something that I have really come to advocate, more so in recent times, right? So when it comes to political systems and infrastructures, as it were, first question is, why do you think these systems are failing? I mean, you'll have people talking about democracy. You'll talk about people. We know that communism and socialism has been tried and tested. It's failed for whatever reason. It's way too draconian. We see that there are democratic systems that are also now, for some reason, starting to lean more towards the draconian. So if that is the case, first question is, why do you think the systems are failing? B, what would you think we can do about it, right? And C, when it comes to data-driven decision making, how can we inculcate this into our education systems?
Okay, so those are really tough questions. I mean, I'm here to sell a giant orange cat. You've done a Miss Universe on me. You know, where the poor girl is done with the ramp and they shove a mic in her face and say, "What do you think about the war in Iraq?" And she's like, yes.
Hey man, you and I are better looking than most of the Miss Universes right now, all right? So,
hey, I'm not going to benchmark myself on that. But on the first question, which is, why do these systems fail?
Yeah.
Right? There's a lot to unpack there, but typically the systems that we have, we tend to assume that they will go on forever. But one of the things we need to consider is system failure is fairly normal.
Okay.
That systems do fail over time. In fact, if you look at the current systems of organizing resources, whether you take democracy with sort of relatively unregulated capitalism, or democracy with heavily regulated capitalism, is what you have in the Nordic countries.
Right.
Or whether you take socialism, of which there are actually a few successful small-scale
efficient stories
there are
of
few,
efficacy.
there are a few success stories here and there.
Right. Right.
And communism, which has pretty much universally been like an absolute nightmare. If you look at these systems, you see one thing, which is that they're quite recent. Right? These are like the byproducts of the Industrial Revolution, if you will. So really, they've been around for a couple of 100 years. We have not yet explored the limits.
You mean the contemporary politics?
The contemporary systems, right? We haven't explored the limits. We haven't explored we don't actually have a lot of data to conclusively say what fails, why do things fail, or what are the limits of such a system. We have vibes, and these vibes we call constitutions.
Right.
And we have ideals that we put down in documents, and we say this and this. But when it comes to the practical implementation, there's a lot of failure points, and a lot of places are literally winging it. What we do have data on are things like kingdoms, autocracies. We have a lot of data on, say, for example, how caste systems functioned. Right? So we also have to ask ourselves, is stability worth that? Is stability worth tyranny? Right? Because we have plenty of examples of tyrannical systems that have lasted for thousands of years.
That have worked.
But the modern day question is, we don't want tyranny.
Yeah.
How do we go about doing it? And there are so many different answers to this. You have sort of the libertarian side of things, which says basically government should be as small as humanly possible. Let people make decisions.
Right.
Great.
In order to make it less autocratic. Government provides a certain number of services. It provides justice. It provides, upholding of contracts. It provides basics, but not everything, and the people should be left free to do that. Okay, great.
But then a lot of our success stories are not based around working like that. Singapore is the polar opposite. America's Silicon Valley is the complete opposite, where the US essentially shoveled a lot of military money into high-value research in this particular place, right? And that's how you have all those libertarians coming out going, oh, venture capital should be great. Y'all are there because the government dumped a lot of money there.
Yeah.
So those kinds of systems, how do you react to something like climate change? Right? And then you look at the other side of things, where you have, say, a kingdom, a monarchy, which is sort of where Sri Lanka has pitched a lot of that. We have our president who is, under the constitution, has all the powers required to be a legal dictator. What happens if you have an idiot running the show, which we've had? Then everything goes to hell. One person is responsible for the tilting of the lives of millions. So it occurs to me that, all of this dealing with system change is us trying to come to a balance with enough stability to get by and enough checks and balances that we are all broadly happy. And, the world is in a state of chaos right now, if you look at what's happening, because a lot of systems that were assumed, that were taken for granted, this whole idea of globalism, the fact that we're going to have these multinational bodies that enforce order, the slow tilt towards a world government, that's in a sense been rolled back recently.
That's true.
In the 90s, the UN was the hot thing. And now we are seeing the increasing loss of authority of these multinational agencies, increasing loss of effectiveness, increasing inability to hold the same set of laws and human values from one end of the earth to the other.
But we can't blame that lack of jurisdiction and power on capitalism also, right?
We can't blame it. These are systems trying to figure themselves out.
But like you mentioned before, you said something very interesting. Untapped capitalism is a problem, unchecked.
Unchecked capitalism is absolutely hell. The libertarian economist thinking is the markets will regulate themselves. Hell no. The markets will produce apps. The markets will produce increasing numbers of increasingly shitty apps. While people go homeless, while streets fill up with crime and violence, while migrants and minorities are increasingly persecuted, because the market doesn't care about anything that doesn't have an economic value. That's how we got to this mess, particularly with the climate, for example, in the first place. Because for the longest time, our economic, and I think we were having this chat earlier, for the longest time, our economics models of the world basically said GDP, and everything else is an externality. Yeah. Oh, what about the mangroves? Externality. What about this? Externality. What about the ocean currents? Externality. Until you wake up, it's 37
now it's
Celsius.
taking a toll.
Yes, you wake up, it's 37 Celsius outside. Air pollution is insane. You can't breathe. You can't go outside without dying. And now we look up and go, oh no, climate's bad. We've screwed this up. Right? That's what happens when you have unregulated, when you put a value on everything, unless you genuinely do know everything, it is dangerous to assume that you have calculated everything required. Right? When you say GDP is the ultimate value that we should guide our nations by, unless that GDP figure also captures measures of human well-being, animal well-being, measures of interaction so that our climate doesn't screw us over, measures of actually people having access to basics, housing, education, healthcare, then that's a shitty measure.
So we have a serious metric issue.
We have a metric issue. We have a massive metric issue.
Because we've always never had proper KPIs to give us...
Yeah, it's a KPI problem.
Yeah.
Like a lot of economists, math is grade 5 algebra stapled onto some old man's assumptions. Like if you read a lot of these papers, it's, oh yeah, I came up with this variable, I call it sigma. And I'm going, oh man, like just stop. Like, you're not doing math. This is just vibes.
Yeah.
This is just vibes. You're just trying to make it look more legit. So there are, one of the most fascinating conversations I once had was with an economist called Alberto Cortica.
Okay.
European guy. His PhD thesis was on Byzantine economies and also on like church-style economies. And
the Byzantine Empire.
Yeah, like how that system ran, where you have sort of feudal land holding and control of labor from the feudal center. And he pointed out that the quality of goods produced was very high, that this was an extremely stable system. And until that point, I was thinking, theocracy is bad, because we've seen what happened in Sri Lanka.
Yeah.
All they produce is more monks and nothing good. And then this guy went, but this. So I've come to sort of broaden my definition of what might work. And I think we're at this stage where we're still tussling, we're still fighting to see what might work.
So we're doing that globally as a species, aren't we?
We're very much doing that globally as a species.
So that's interesting. So it's all, it seems like everyone's trying to find the right word is equilibrium here.
Everyone's trying to find
because some systems would work somewhere.
Yeah.
Some systems, a more self-sufficient,
Yeah.
capitalist-based system would work, like you said,
in one place
in the Norse areas. But
in the Nordic areas, you have a democracy that has capitalist markets. It's a capitalist system, but with tight regulations, caps. So you can take from the rich, put towards better public infrastructure and so on. And that's a system that works. Where they happily vote higher taxes on themselves to give more to education.
because there's a return on the tax.
Because there's a return, right? They see that their children are getting better educations. So
Finland and such, right?
yeah.
Helsinki.
So, but would that system even work in implementation in Sri Lanka? I don't know.
Or Asia at large, right? Yeah.
Or Asia at large. Like, will it work? We don't know. We have to try a whole bunch of things and see what happens. So I'm in this mode of like, we should be trying more things. I think generally, personally, I massively dislike religious autocracies.
Same.
Yeah, like I don't want.
Because historically it's proven that it's not worked.
Historically, it has. We've seen crusades happen.
Yeah.
We've seen holy wars happen. Don't want any of that shit.
Yeah.
I would prefer for us, even in say the context of Sri Lanka, I think we put too much attention, too much energy, too much authority
on the cultural element.
Yeah, and on the office of the president. I want to see municipalities doing more stuff. Maybe Colombo will go, hey, we can do this. Well, let's try this urban garden stuff or whatever. Another municipality is doing something else, right? This sort of Garden of Eden of different systems adapting constantly. And who knows?
Working simultaneously.
Simultaneously. One of them might find something interesting. Like there's a place called Marina Leda in Spain, for example, where a particular village decided they were done with sort of, and they basically semi-seceded, and they said, okay, we are going to now operate this village as a workers' collective. We're going to make sure that everybody has their fair, they have a roof over their heads, they have food on the table. We're going to make this a fair system. And they actually have factories. They actually produce goods that they sell and redistribute. And that's the kind of thing where if you looked at it in early 2000s, you'd have said, oh, that's socialism. That doesn't work in the real world. But some people have made it work. Likewise, in Vietnam, the middle layer of Vietnam's economy are a bunch of small, medium enterprises. A lot of them are co-ops. So they've gone, yes, we want markets. We want to sell stuff. We want to make stuff. We want to sell stuff. Great. We'll keep that capitalism. But we don't want rich shareholders coming in, dumping money, extracting all the value, screwing over the workers. So let's do a co-op. Right? So, when we hear about the horrendous stuff that's happening in the world, I think it's also important to remember that someone somewhere out there is also experimenting. And that's interesting data. That's interesting knowledge to have. So, someone might discover a way out of this mess.
So we need to cognizantly cultivate more customized systems.
Absolutely.
There's no, how do we say this? There's no one-size-fits-all.
Absolutely.
Scenario.
I think there is no one-size-fits-all.
And that's a mistake that countries are making. They're trying to implement a one-size-fits-all sort of a structure or infrastructure.
Absolutely.
That won't align and work with them, right?
Absolutely.
Work for them.
And we've had this, over centuries.
To learn from it, right?
Yeah, and also we have countries coming and imposing their systems. Like Britain coming and imposing their systems on India, on Sri Lanka, turning us into units of empire, for example. And then now we look out to the West and we say we're trying to get there. But we're not doing that either. We're sort of muddling along in our way. So I think we should be muddling. I think we should be actually coming up with interesting positions on these spectrums, right, where we can actually function.
Was it because we were sort of, you feel, it's like we were shown a magic window or a door, but sort of at the same time, culled and crippled a little bit to get there? Do you feel the colonizing did that to us also?
Yeah, certainly.
It crippled us?
Certainly. And also, colonizing and then following that, this wave of globalism, this sort of, you remember a book called The Earth is Flat?
Yes.
Where this guy argued, everybody can be connected. So what should we be doing? The jobs in the US, we should be outsourcing to India because the brown guy is cheaper. So what happens there? Now you have an America that can't build much because all those jobs are gone. The manufacturing jobs have
But
moved.
you're creating a surplus in one place and a massive deficit in another.
And now you have a whole bunch of countries like ours which can produce stuff but which never realize the end value. Right? We're down to making little components and adding raw materials to the end product. We make tea here with near slave labor conditions that then gets sold and repackaged in London for expensive amounts of money, right? And we only see a fraction of that. And meanwhile, they can't build the damn tea or the iPhone either, right? So I think the world would be a lot better place if we actually
exchange systems,
if
synergized,
we actually put some energy into doing stuff ourselves and experimenting with what mix works. This is not an argument for self-sufficiency. Sri Lanka has never been self-sufficient. There's a whole strain of thinking that says Sri Lanka was agriculture self-sufficient in we fed 21 million people back in the 11th century, which is bullshit. I read the 𝐘𝐻𝐧𝐚𝐢𝐬𝐥𝐚𝐧𝐝, which detail these armies that were supposedly launched back in the 11th century by 𝐸𝐸𝐸 the Great. And if you do the math backwards, you calculate the levy, half of all people, which is the male population, 1 in 10 of that. You do the math backwards, you do end up with a 21.5 million figure. But that figure does not actually appear anywhere else in history.
Right.
And you end up with impossible armies, supposedly, right? That never actually, that should have been undefeated. Because you end up with figures like army of 1.25 million launched into India. Well, great. The Roman army was 490,000 people at its peak.
Yes.
Genghis Khan's whole operation was 900,000 people.
Alexander the Great was
600,000,
yeah.
So we supposedly launched an army that is larger than the Ming Dynasty's armies. And, it doesn't. You can apply some common sense and go, this doesn't make sense.
Yes.
So we haven't been self-sufficient. And then you actually look at the numbers and go, no, we were clearly importing stuff. We are still importing stuff. We are exchanging trade because, yes, we are not self-sufficient. So I don't think we should be going towards let's be 100% self-sufficient. But we should be able to make the basics of an 18th or 19th, 20th century economy. Every country, I think, should be able to make the basic pillars on which they can prevent total failure, I would say. So, like a really good example is Sri Lankan steel making. You can't find good steel in the country. I've been trying. I'm building a forge in Kandy. Right? And you can't get good 1095, 1065. You're basically getting Sudhyakada or nothing. You're getting either stainless steel, carbon steel or nothing. You don't know what grade of this has. And it is incredibly primitive. And I'm looking at this and going, this is 19th century tech. Power hammers are well-known tech, right? Japanese swordsmiths producing katanas have power hammers.
Way before even 19th century.
Yeah, right? And this is not particularly sophisticated tech, but we don't have it because we're used to importing large amounts of steel. So as a result, when you want to get a manna or an udalla, you really have to go a hell of a lot out of our way to find a supply chain for that.
So are you telling me since time immemorial in our history, we've been importing steel?
No, not necessarily just steel.
So we may have at some point had...
We've certainly had lots of trade with pretty much the entirety of the Silk Road. We sent out spices, we brought in food, we brought in materials, ideas, culture, language, music.
No, but the idea that we didn't with armies that size, considering that the data is accurate...
This steel story is modern. This steel story is something I went through last week, where I was looking at it and going, why don't we have steel? Why don't we have blacksmiths? Why does it all come down to going to 𝐸𝐸𝐸𝐸 and buying something that falls apart within 3 days? Because we've compromised our own supply chains of basic essential stuff. So I think all countries, all civilizations should at a minimum be able to produce basics. Maybe not Intel microprocessors, right? but you should be able to make 𝐸𝐸𝐿.
This is true.
Right? You should be able to grow enough food. You should be able to do enough that you're not at the mercy of another system, and therefore you're free to evolve.
It's ironic that being a tropical island just that has so much of vegetation, flora and fauna, fruits and vegetables, that we still need to import this, huh?
Yeah. It's genuinely stupid that if you look at the market, there is only a handful of strains of things that you can buy, whether it's bananas, onions,
even rice.
Even rice, right?
Because we're exporting the bulk of rice.
And
but we're importing as well.
Do you know where Paripu comes from, by the way?
No. India?
Canada, India, and Australia.
Okay.
So it's genuinely stupid that we have such a small variety of consumable food in a country where anything grows. Where
and there's an abundance of resources, favorable climate.
Absolutely. So, there are I think we can moan about this forever, but my solution is to go, okay, I'm setting up my farm in Kandy, right? And I'm moving there in about 6 months when the earth bag house will be completed, but I'm going to farm. I'm going to figure out how to do this.
Can't wait to pay you a visit for a day or two there.
I know nothing about farming. There's a wild boar on the property that keeps chasing me around. So you will probably see me screaming and running. I've managed to grow a potato, a single potato, right? There's not been much more success other than that. In here, where I'm staying right now, managed to grow a potato, a papaya tree that I never planted. I was trying to grow beans, but I got papayas instead.
Regular Jack and the Beanstalk scenario.
Yeah, so it's going to be a mixed bag, but it's going to be interesting to learn how to do
this. This is true, yeah. Fantastic. So the last part of the question, where data comes in. Like how can we use, because see, I'm tying this up also because there's a lot of data-driven insights and there's a lot of AI and there's a lot of advance of tech in your writing as well. So figuring out how data can be used to sort of rehash or regurgitate systems, economic systems, political systems. We're seeing it happening to a certain degree, but not at the level that it was maybe projected or forecasted. So where do you see this going? That's one thing. And how has that inspired your writing, especially the new stuff that you're writing?
So when people say data, they typically mean, source, tabulated, all of that. But that's information. Data is much rawer. Data can be, you've had 100 conversations with farmers around the country, which we've had for the organic farming crisis. We went around like 1,000 kilometers just talking to farmers, trying to understand what they were going through. Data can be satellite information, whatever. So there are two ways that this can go, and both are happening simultaneously. One is the increased use of data to improve services for people.
Right.
And the increased use of data by people to improve their own lot in life. Like, let's take a microcosm example. Watchdog is now operating, we are collecting data, pseudo-operating 3 farms, including the one in Kandy, right? And we're collecting data, we're improving our own knowledge, we're building these wikis of seeds and plants and things that we've tested will actually grow and so on.
Watchdog was established in 2019.
Yeah, 2019.
Okay.
We started out as a fact checker. Then we realized, our sources of information aren't great. We got to do the investigations ourselves.
Right.
So we went, okay, we are going to set a new bar. And when we get into something, we are going to absolutely go through the whole thing.
Right.
We're not limited by, we have to put out X articles every week, the way most news sites are run. We will spend months digging into something if we have to.
Because also there's no hidden agendas for you, no?
Yeah, because the data is there, the stupid thing is there.
Completely transparent. It's candid.
It's read it. You don't have to like us. I don't genuinely care about what anybody thinks of us, but read the thing, read the data, draw your own conclusion.
Right.
So part of that is, we've seen people using the data that we give to improve their own businesses, to improve their own dealings with the world. And I think that's genuinely useful. In fact, we've had people calling and yelling at us when we were like, when the IMF was coming in, for example,
right?
When it was first announced that they were coming in, we had people calling and yelling at us for not writing about it. And like, how am I going to, we've been relying on your reporting. How are we going to, I'm trying to forecast what's happening next for our business. How are we going to do it if you don't do your job? And I'm like, firstly, hold the fuck up. But also, we're waiting for more information. Because when we say something, we want to know what you're talking about. So one is people improving their own lives with data, and government improving services.
Right.
We've sat in on meetings and conversations at the Department of Census and Statistics. They're slow, but they're trying to improve. They have new web pages showing the data that they collect, the wealth of information, and so on. The other is governments, political parties using data to control narratives, to control people. And that is also like these streams are rising simultaneously. And it's a kind of a dangerous situation because the same systems that you build to tell you about the country that you're operating can also be used to tell you about the country you want to destroy or manipulate.
Like the global manipulation of data to exploit.
Here's a really good example.
Using propaganda, right?
Yes, but here's a really terrifying and really good example. Black July. Right. When Sinhalese mobs burned down thousands of Tamil homes, killed, slaughtered, raped, murdered, all of that, they did it using voter lists that showed which households are Tamil and which households weren't. That's a use of data to spark war, right? That is sadly a thing that is also increasing.
So there's a gross misuse of
both of these are going to happen at the same time. Historically, both of these things have always happened at the same time.
How can this be curated, though? I mean, you can gain actionable insights, but, okay, in a state level, there could probably be regulatory frameworks.
Typically, regulation.
But then who sets the frameworks if not the state itself?
Who sets the frameworks? And also, is the regulation practically doable? This is something we've been arguing back and forth about. The online safety bill is one, right, which is an absolute, you look at it and go, this is made up by ministers who don't want to be insulted on Facebook.
Right.
But the Data Privacy Act and so on was a lot of, okay, if the state is going to do this, then it needs we are inserting language that goes, it needs a court to decide, to give a warrant. The police can't randomly knock on people's houses and take away their hard drives.
Right.
They have to have a warrant for this. There has to be legal procedure. So procedure, process, regulation, this is how you curb the worst excesses of a system, if you will. But for that, those things have to work. Sri Lankan courts, notoriously slow, in many cases corrupt. Police, let's not even get into that. So these systems have to work for those regulations to actually be useful. I think like more people should be doing stuff on a personal basis. Like on a personal basis, there is...
You mean for self-efficacy and self-improvement?
Yeah, and just to understand the world around them, right? On a personal basis, there is nothing to stop a person from going and reading all of Wikipedia. Well, other than the fact that all of Wikipedia is large. There's nothing to stop a person staying on top of the latest scientific research, for example, when so much of it is published directly and free of charge on archive and other platforms. There's nothing to stop a person, maybe not necessarily embedding themselves in the news cycle, but deciding on a goal and going, how do I acquire information for that goal? How do I measure my changes as I go through that process? If you think about it, we live in a crazy time where the sum totality of human knowledge is at our fingertips.
This is true.
And we kind of don't use a lot of it, right? The internet exists, but you and I use it to send each other cat memes on WhatsApp.
This is true.
So it's a crazy time because we have so much of information out there. And for people wanting to learn how to do these things, there's YouTube. The old trope of there's going to be an Indian guy on YouTube explaining how it's done.
There's Google, there's...
YouTube, Google, there's Coursera, there's edX, there's FutureLearn, there's Skillshare.
Skillshare.
That go into the depths of these skills and actually have structured courses for those who like structure. It's an incredible time. You can find almost any book you can think of. You can find almost any research paper you want.
That's true. Anything, no? When it comes to the performance art or literature. Or
anything, right? And
never have we had everything from academia research papers to books to songs to long lost like even stories.
Absolutely. You can understand at a moment's notice. You can read or absorb at a moment's notice what's happening from Colombo to Colombia. Right? And you can do it with just this. That's a power that medieval kings would have killed to have. You can talk to anybody around the world now. And I think humans as a civilization, we have to get a lot more intelligent and smarter about actually using these things as tools and not as being used by them.
Yeah, we have a lot of solution architecture that we don't know how to implement and how to align it with our objectives and needs and wants and desires, right?
Absolutely. Instead, we are kind of stuck here going, okay, someone's arguing with me on Twitter.
That's true.
Could be spending that time.
We spend a lot of energy on negative things instead of actually building up our knowledge and skill sets and acuity, what you're talking about. So, coming back to storytelling.
Yes.
What you love to do, what you're most fond of. All right. Where was your earliest, where would you say the genesis was where you fell in love with story? And what was that story?
Okay. So, I actually have something about this. Ammi recently... so she recently gave me one of my grade 2 notebooks, grade 2 or grade 1 notebooks. Because being Ammi, she had collected this, right? Okay. And it's apparently the cat had peed on it.
as all households with cats
do. Right? We have many cats. Cattler had peed on it, and he's called Cattler for a reason, which may be outside the scope, but she gave me this thing and she said, that's your first story. And I read it, and it's written from the perspective of a stray dog.
Okay.
It's grade 1 something, right? And I'm writing, I am a stray dog, like hungry and grey, and I like nobody and nobody likes me, and they throw stones at me and I growl at them because I want to eat them. Right? So this should have been grade 1 or 2. I can't remember writing this, but it's there. So I think I've had that fascination of stories. Right? It's been buried at the back of my mind, and I read that and I went, okay, this is really interesting, because apparently the teacher thought that I was being abused as a child, and she called my parents. And mind you, there's a whole lot of shit going on in my household, but nobody was turning me into a stray dog, but she thought this was absolutely abnormal, because most children wrote about themselves or something. And I was going, let me put my head into that of a stray dog and try and see the world from its eyes. And I think that impetus of trying to see the world through something else, that continued with me. And I distinctly remember as a child making this decision. Like I spent a while writing an encyclopedia of the solar system. And this was back before my hands are broken and so on. So now I really can't write, but back then I had very beautiful handwriting. I drew Jupiter in pencil and all that. And I told my father I want to be an astronaut. So my father, who was a bit of a piece of work, he said, you'll never be an astronaut. You're not American. You can't see worth a damn. Your eyes are completely screwed. You're not going to make it. So I remember deciding then and there that if I couldn't go out and see the universe, I would bloody well design my own universe.
And write about it.
Universes. And that, I think, somewhere like grade 5, I think, is when that switch for me went, I'm intentionally going to do this. And I'm going to keep doing this. And I found that I loved doing it. I loved English literature classes. My parents always made me take math. But it was literature, language, storytelling that I loved the most. And that's when I really paid attention in class. So it was those classes, those teachers that actually, kept me going.
What's your earliest memory of, say, someone else's story that you read that stayed with you?
Lord of the Rings.
How old were you?
Heinemann reader in grade 8, I think. I had borrowed.
So you were about 12 then, I think.
It would have been 12. I remember there was a passage of Frodo and Sam stumbling over the roots of trees, right? And the way these trees sort of loomed out of the darkness, the old forest, right? I think it was from the Tom Bombadil passage. That really stayed with me. And there are these moments of like little things that constantly stayed. Enid Blyton stuff stayed with me, but eventually started to fade. That passage from The Lord of the Rings, it stayed with me.
Stayed with you.
Arthur C. Clarke, not even the Rama stuff. The Rama stuff was like, okay, interesting, but I don't like the writing. But Arthur C. Clarke's Ghost from the Grand Banks, there's a character, she's a mathematician or something, who explores the Fibonacci set. Not the Fibonacci set,
sequence.
Sorry, the Mandelbrot set.
Okay.
Right, and she spends her time, and this is an infinitely recursive set, so you can literally explore this.
What is that?
It's basically a graph. It's a drawing, it's a visualization.
What's it called?
It's called the Mandelbrot set.
Okay.
It's a visualization of a particular equation. And the nature of this equation is if you graph it, it draws itself infinitely over and over again at differing zoom levels. So you see a bunch of islands in false color. You zoom in on one of those islands and you realize the shoreline of that looks like another bunch of islands. And you keep zooming in forever. I found this genuinely fascinating, and that stayed with me. That motif actually pops up in the Pilgrim Machines, the most recent book, the sequel to the Salvage Crew, which I just sent off to the publisher.
Right.
I was writing that, and that memory went in my mind. It went this, right? This is what, like, the plot of Pilgrim Machines is broadly a spaceship talks to God. And this is, and
nice.
There's something in my head going, this is what God would be like, an infinitely repeating, recursive being, a sequence made of stars and stardust, right? This is what such a being would be like, and that kept popping up in my head. So I have these moments of these books just saved up, stored there.
Talk about the nebula, man. You're the well, I want to say the only Sri Lankan, but that's not exactly
Clarke,
true.
I think
Arthur C. Clarke was
yeah.
the first,
Yeah.
and then you're the second.
Yeah.
Though Arthur C. Clarke wasn't born in Sri Lanka, right?
Yeah, but we count him as a Sri Lankan, though.
A Sri Lankan treasure.
Yeah, I think that's like my egalitarian vision of Sri Lanka is one where almost anybody can call it a home.
Right.
If you stay here
long enough,
you actually fall in love with the people, the place, and you don't. And everybody's Sri Lankan.
Fair enough. Complete respect. But born in Sri Lanka, you're the first Sri Lankan to be nominated for a nebula, which is a huge accolade. Yeah. This was for Salvage?
No, this was for a short story that I co-wrote with a very good friend of mine, R.R. Verdi. Fantastic guy. Very lyrical, epic fantasy writer. And we just
Indian in the States, yes?
Yes.
Verdi?
Yes.
Yeah.
And we just started jamming on, the nebula thing was like almost at the tail end of something.
What was the short story called?
It was called Messenger. And we had watched Pacific Rim 2. And we hated it.
Okay.
And we were bitching about it on Facebook.
Compared to one. One was good.
One was fantastic.
Yes.
Right? The sense of weight and everything. 2 was a complete joke. And we loved Pacific Rim 1, and we loved the whole kaiju and the mechas series, right?
Right.
I'm a mech warrior player. I think people who are into that very specific thing will recognize the reference.
Okay.
Yeah. So we just started jamming on, hey, if an alien, attacked, like if something happened, why the hell would they go to New York? Why would they attack Washington, D.C.? They'd go for the center of mass, right? They go for where the most people are.
Yes.
Where the most life sickness. They'd attack India. They'd attack China. Right? This is where you hit. So we started writing a mecha story from the perspective of these machines are built in the shape and nature of the old gods by Tata Industries and the Indian government and Sri Lanka. So it was like we had a blast imagining this. But
it was a short story, short fiction.
So you had Kali, 6 arms, driving every operator mad, right? Literally blood sacrifice before she goes into battle in the Bay of Bengal. You have Sri Lanka's Ravana coming up, ultimate surveillance state technology, pinpointing targets and calling down airstrikes.
Nice.
And you have Amaterasu from Japan, right? And we had so much fun just building this. And we wrote this story and it made it. And then, honestly, I pay more attention to the writing side of things.
Okay.
Because that's why I genuinely have fun. The rest for me, the awards, like even the Gratian and Nebula and all these things, they're nice. But I'm detached from it in the sense that when it happens, I've already had my fun. And it's a nice bonus on top.
2022, Wretched and the Damned. Gratian?
Yeah, Gratian. 2023. Gratian.
2 winners, right? You and there was
Chirantha Rajapaksa, yes.
Rajapaksa as well.
She had a book of short stories. And I was very happy to be there. I said all the right things. I was a little bit annoyed as well because, at the Gratian, they were talking about how Sri Lankan literature is on the rise. So I had to get up and say, well, we have jailed people like S. Aruran, for example, State Literary Award winner, who has been writing for years, 14 years in jail since his time in university. And he had only been released a couple of months prior. So you talk about Sri Lankan literature, but you're not really reading Sri Lankans.
Right.
There's a lot under the surface. So, and it was this sort of very posh crowd that I had to. I
But
felt
it's
like
good.
I had to.
It's
say
good you
this,
did that, man.
right? But for me, that stuff comes later.
Yeah.
Because I enjoy myself writing. I
the
put
storytelling.
updates on my writing every time because I love it. That's what I wake up and I want to do.
I know, man. So we connected on that, right?
Yeah.
So we connected on the storytelling aspect, I
Yes.
think, primarily.
Yeah.
And then also the language.
The language of it. Yes.
The richness of the kings,
Yes.
of how we communicate to each other and
Yes.
speak. And we were like, okay, there's someone else where I'm in a room and they're not rolling their freaking eyes about.
Yes, and messing and hanging out with people who are fascinated by what you can do with
Idiosyncratic souls.
language. Yes, that's one of the joys of this job, quote unquote, is that I get to meet people like you, is I get to meet people like this, and one of the sad parts of it is they're incredibly rare. So most of the time I go to a place and I end up going, shit.
Because you've represented like the country and you've been in a lot of forums, you've handled a lot of workshops,
Yeah.
you've been invited across the board.
Yeah.
Also, man, you've got the Forbes
30
30
under
thing,
30.
30 under 30 thing. How did that come about?
I have no idea.
That's congratulations. That's
I
amazing.
legitimately don't and the people don't believe me when I say this, right? I have never paid attention to the Forbes 30 under 30. Usually when I do pay attention, it's because they've turned out to be criminals. So I guess I'll see you in Valikada. Right? So this nomination came out of nowhere. And I don't mean to say that I'm completely detached from, this, right? The awards, the recognition. It's nice. It's one hell of an ego boost. But let's face it, I already have a giant ego. I don't need any more boosting. I need time to go home and write.
That's true.
And I think one of the recent things I'm actually really amazed by and proud of is the fact that we have work on the moon.
Yes.
Yes. So
Yes.
now
Talk
we may
about that very quickly.
So there's a physicist called Dr. Samuel Peralta who's been running a series of science fiction anthologies for a long time.
Is it the slow, sad suicide that was shot to the moon?
No. This is a whole bunch of stuff. So I wrote a short story for Dr. Peralta in his Crime and Punishment series, which looks at like what the future of crime will be.
Okay.
And for the salvage crew, right, because the perspective of the salvage crew is from a machine poet.
Right.
I retrained an AI model, OpenAI's GPT-2. I built a machine poet to write that poetry because I wanted to capture that slightly inhuman feeling. So I built an AI model to actually write the poetry.
Holy shit.
Samuel Peralta saw
You
that.
built your own GP2 AI tool to co-write the story that you wrote.
Not even the story. It gave the
Just
voice,
parts, character, voice to the character.
for the machine poet.
Okay.
The writing of the story is even wilder because I thought, well, God built the world in 6 days, right? And he went on holiday on the 7th. Surely with 6 days and enough coffee, I can do better. So I wrote a galaxy generator. I have a piece of code that generates stars, planets, civilizations.
You showed me this.
Yes, you've
The
seen
planet
this.
generator,
Yeah.
yes.
I've actually open sourced it on GitHub. I mean, I don't think it's that particularly sophisticated as far as these things go. I wrote a galaxy generator. I wrote Markov chains that simulated weather, events, all of these stuff.
And you wrote a piece of short fiction. And this has been sent to the moon.
So with Samuel Peralta, he wanted to work with the model. We did a book of poems called Sonnets from the Machine and other things. And an anthology that I had curated called Megastructures, paying homage to Arthur C. Clarke and featuring writers from all over the world, from India to the US. That's also on that. So I have 3 pieces of work. And the fourth piece is about a giant orange cat hustling his way through the fantasy world.
Nice.
So, in 6 million years from now, a bunch of aliens or Homo sapiens 3.0, whatever, will open that thing up and they'll get trolled because there's a story about a giant
orange cat, man.
I'm superbly happy about that.
Congratulations
It's
on the moon
absolutely
thing, man, and everything. It's fantastic. We're down to the last segment, which is the rapid fire segment, which is always fun.
Oh, Lord.
Just say whatever, the first thing that comes to your mind. Okay, so there'll be probably 5 or 6 questions.
Okay.
And just go for it, just wing
Okay.
it. What is your favorite food?
For chicken fried rice.
Favorite drink to have? Let's take alcohol drink.
𝐈𝐬𝐥𝐚𝐧𝐝 with I used to say 𝐈𝐬𝐥𝐚𝐧𝐝 and Sprite, but now it's 𝐈𝐬𝐥𝐚𝐧𝐝 with tonic. Because
Nice.
diabetes.
Nice. What is your favorite song of all time?
Favorite song of all time? Very hard to answer. Genuinely very hard. But I would have to say there's a song in Cyberpunk 2077 called We. It's by Martin and I can't pronounce his last name.
Okay.
It's like legitimately beyond my tongue to even articulate those syllables. I listen to that quite a lot.
Okay.
And I listen to it almost on a daily basis.
Okay.
It's not a technically sophisticated
What's a song called We?
It's V, literally just
V,
the
okay.
letter V.
Okay.
And it's the theme song of the main character in Cyberpunk. Ever since that game came out, I've been listening to that track almost on a daily basis.
Nice.
And it's almost part of my wake-up ritual now.
I shall check it out. I've not heard of the song.
It speaks to me. Now, Moonlight Sonata, third movement, played on the electric guitar with the drums. That for me is like, oh yeah, that is technical. Roland playing that's technical sophistication. But I will listen to We on a daily basis.
Nice. What is your go-to album? If you're stuck on a desert island, one music album you can take with you, what is that?
Audio Machine Magnus.
Nice. Favorite animation of all time?
Spirited Away by Hayao Miyazaki.
Nice.
Absolutely my favorite. I will rewatch that over and over again. I have.
Nice.
I would like to put in a good word for Mewtwo Strikes Back, because I'm a huge Pokemon fan, and The Spell of the Unknown.
Full Metal Alchemist?
Well, if you're looking at TV series, Full Metal Alchemist is one of my favorites. It's Brotherhood. Tight, perfectly built, like incredible anime.
Favorite TV show of all time?
Favorite TV show, House.
Ah!
House, man. House has been,
Nice one.
and House has some genuinely great music in it. My Body is a Cage, sung by Peter Gabriel.
Yeah.
Black Labs singing.
I've been inundating myself with Peter Gabriel, especially the new album.
He's fantastic, right?
amazing.
And House, Hugh Laurie, man, that is a
The
different
character,
level.
no?
That's a
The
character.
character.
That is the character for me.
Written for him.
It's written for him.
It's written for him.
Yeah.
This is good because you're a writer. Who is your favorite? Who would you say is the best written character of all time? In a book, in a story.
In a story.
It could have been adapted to film, and maybe it was brought to life in the screen.
Lord Veterinary in the Discworld.
Woo!
The
Fun for
most
Lord.
complex character in Discworld. I would say I'd put in Granny Weatherwax at a very close second, but making these complex moral choices, running the city like a tyrant, but in such a way that everybody is sort of, let's keep the tyrant there because he's good to us. It's an incredibly complex character. And you only see snippets of that character in every book, but across the books, you see a truly complex personality emerge.
And it's enough to get you thinking of understanding his entire level of power and influence.
It is.
across the
Veterinary,
world.
Granny Weatherwax, and Death. Because I love Death.
Yes.
Deciding to join the Clutchian Foreign Legion and getting drunk on a curry and wondering what's the meaning of death. Not what's the meaning of life, what's the meaning of death.
What's the meaning of death?
And I love Death kneeling and saying, Lord, what does the harvest hope for if not for the Reaper Man?
Yes. Beautiful.
Yeah,
That's
those are my
beautiful.
favorites.
Favorite book of all time?
Favorite book of all time? Einstein's Dreams by Alan Lightman.
Nice.
It's a beautiful book where Einstein falls asleep and he dreams of multiple Viennas. These are Viennas where time and space are different. In one Vienna, for example, time moves slower towards the center.
Okay.
So couples that have broken away from their parents run hand in hand towards the center, slowing down as they go, knowing that they will be preserved forever at the heart of the city. It is such a beautiful book.
What is it called again?
Einstein's Dreams by Alan Lightman.
Okay.
I would put in a word for Exhalations by Ted Chiang, Story of Your Life and Others by Ted Chiang, and Fictions by Borges, and pretty much everything else Ole Guin has written. But by this time, I've broken the question down.
You broke the question down. So thank you, brother. Thank you for being here. I know that if this was like a Joe Roganish podcast where we had a good 2-3 hours more, we could have gone on. There's so much.
Oh, yeah.
Obviously, I would love to have you again at some point.
I'd love to be back.
And thank you for your time. As always, you've been a legend. It's been a pleasure. I've learned so much. I know that everyone watching would also learn a lot from you. And you've also mentioned what's new, what's up and coming. If people need to get in touch with you for anything at all, how could they go about this?
Firstly, they can't. That's the best response. Don't get in touch with me. I'm notoriously bad at anything, even from WhatsApping. But if you want to... Professionally, Yudhanjaya.com.
There you go.
That's, got my emails and stuff on it. Email is quite literally the best way to reach me. Fantastic. Which I think all of my friends find this super frustrating. There's a group that we've been trying to coordinate some drinks at Mintage for a while now. And every time everybody is there, I'm not. I've just forgotten altogether.
Nice, man. So thank you. Thanks once again, Masang.
Thank you for having me.
And great chat.
Great chat indeed.
This is the Island Renaissance podcast. I know you guys are going to love this one. So, cheers.